Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're going deep into the Midwest. Frozen highways, whiteout conditions, and the kind of darkness that swallows everything whole. These are stories submitted by truckers on Reddit, people who drive for a living, who know the road better than most of us know our own neighborhoods, and even they couldn't explain what happened to them. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, and let's get into it. Story 1. The Man in the Median. Dale had been driving long-haul routes through the Midwest for going on 11 years when this happened. He knew Interstate 90 through South Dakota the way most people know their morning commute. Every overpass, every rest stop, every mile marker that meant he was getting close to the end of his run. He'd driven that stretch in summer, in fall, in spring mud season, but nothing. He said nothing prepared him for what February in a full-blown blizzard does to that highway, and nothing prepared him for what he saw out there in the median that night. It was a Tuesday in late February. The weather had been building all day. He'd picked up his load outside of Sioux Falls, a standard freight haul, nothing special, and was supposed to make it to Rapid City before midnight. The forecast was calling for 6 to 8 inches, which for a seasoned trucker like Dale is basically just a slightly annoying Tuesday. He'd driven through worse, way worse. He said the first hour was fine. Snowing, sure, but manageable. Visibility was maybe a quarter mile, the roads were packed but not icy, his wipers were keeping up. He had his CB on, listening to the other drivers chatter about road conditions ahead. The usual stuff, nothing alarming. Then, somewhere around the Merville exit, everything changed. The wind picked up out of nowhere, not gradually, suddenly. One moment it was a steady snowfall, and the next it was like someone turned on a machine. The gusts hit the side of his cab and he felt the whole rig shudder. 40, maybe 45-mile-an-hour crosswinds. The snow went completely horizontal. His headlights lit up nothing but a wall of white. He slowed down from 55 to about 30, then 25. He could barely see the lane markers. He said he was gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles ached. He was leaning forward in his seat like that was somehow going to help him see better. The CB had gone quiet. Most of the other drivers had pulled over or found truck stops. Dale knew he should do the same. But the next exit with a safe pull-off was still about 12 miles ahead. That's when he saw the figure. He almost didn't catch it. It was just at the edge of his headlight reach, out in the median between the eastbound and westbound lanes. At first, he thought it was a deer. He'd nearly hit enough of those on this stretch to always be watching for them. But the shape was wrong. It was tall, it was standing upright, and it wasn't moving. Dale eased off the gas a little more, squinting through the glass. The snow was hammering his windshield so hard the wipers could barely keep up. But for just a second, just 1 second, the gusts shifted and he got a clear look. It was a man, standing in the median, in what looked like, and this is the part that got Dale, a short-sleeved shirt. No coat, no hat, no visible winter gear of any kind, just standing there in the middle of a whiteout blizzard, facing the westbound lanes, facing Dale's truck head-on. Dale said his first instinct was that this person was in trouble, car accident maybe, someone who'd gone off the road and was disoriented, wandering. He hit his air brakes, slowed down to almost a crawl, and flipped on his four-ways. He grabbed his CB. Any drivers eastbound on 90 near mile marker 142, there is a person, I repeat, a person on foot in the median. Somebody call highway patrol. No response, just static. By now, Dale was almost parallel with the figure. He was going maybe 10 miles an hour. He rolled down his window despite the screaming cold and leaned out. Snow hit his face like needles. He shouted. He couldn't hear his own voice over the wind. And then the figure turned its head. Dale said it didn't turn its whole body, just the head, slow, all the way to the side, like it was tracking him as he rolled past. He said the face was wrong somehow, not in a way he could specifically describe, even years later, just wrong. The expression wasn't fear, it wasn't confusion, it wasn't the face of someone who needed help. He said it looked like someone watching traffic, patiently, like it was waiting for something specific. Dale put his foot down and drove. He didn't pull over. He didn't call 911 from his cell until he was a good 3 miles past the spot, and by then his hands were shaking so bad he could barely dial. He told the dispatcher what he'd seen. A man, median, mile marker 142, no winter clothing, just standing there. The dispatcher said they'd send a unit to check. When Dale finally reached the truck stop outside of Kadoka, he parked, went inside, and sat in a booth with a cup of coffee for 2 hours. He was too wound up to sleep. Around 3 in the morning, he called the highway patrol dispatch number and asked if they'd found anything at the location he'd reported. The woman on the phone checked, typed something, paused. She said a unit had responded, lights and siren, given the weather and the circumstances. They'd searched both sides of the median from mile marker 140 to 144. They found nothing. No person, no tracks in the snow, no signs that anyone had been standing out there at all. Dale said that's the part that gets him. Not the figure itself, as horrifying as it was, but the tracks, or the lack of them, because the snow on the median had been accumulating for hours by that point. If a real person had been standing out there, even for just a few minutes, there would have been some kind of impression, some kind of mark. There was nothing. He still drives that route. He says he has no choice. It's his livelihood. But every single time he passes mile marker 142, even in the dead of summer with the sun blazing, he said he feels the same thing, like something out there is still watching the road, still waiting.
Story 2. The truck stop that wasn't there. Hank had been driving refrigerated loads through the Midwest for about 6 years when this happened. He specialized in perishable freight, dairy, produce, sometimes medical supplies, which meant he was often on tighter schedules than most drivers. He couldn't afford to sit out a storm for 12 hours the way some of the flatbed guys could. If his load had a delivery window, he made the delivery window. Simple as that. This particular night was a run from Kansas City up through Nebraska and into Iowa. It was mid-January. The weather had rolled in faster than the forecast predicted. That's pretty standard for the Nebraska Panhandle, he said. The plains don't give you much warning. 1 hour you're driving under a gray, overcast sky, and the next you're in a full-ground blizzard, which is a specific kind of hell. It's not just snow coming from above, it's snow being picked up off the ground and thrown horizontally, so you can't tell what's sky and what's road and what's field. Everything merges into one white blindness. Hank had been pushing through it for about an hour and a half when his fuel gauge started bothering him. He was still fine. He had maybe 140 miles of range, but in that kind of weather, with no guarantee of finding an open station, he got anxious when the needle dipped below the halfway mark. That was just his policy. His GPS was showing a truck stop about 11 miles ahead, a place called Garrett's Fuel and Rest, which he'd never heard of, but that wasn't unusual. Smaller independent stops came and went on that stretch. He decided to hit it, top off, get a hot coffee, and a 20-minute break to let the worst of the weather ease up. He found the exit easily enough. The ramp was snow-covered but passable. He turned off the interstate onto a 2-lane county road heading north, following his GPS. The road was dark, no streetlights, no other vehicles, no farmhouse lights visible through the storm, just his headlights and the swirling white. About 1.5 miles off the interstate, the GPS announced he'd arrived. Hank looked up. There was a truck stop, or at least something that looked like one. A large, low building with what appeared to be exterior lighting. The glow was faint and yellowish, almost sickly, but it was there. A couple of fuel pump canopies, a gravel lot. He could see the shapes of what might have been 2 or 3 other parked trucks off to the right. He pulled in. And right away, he said, something felt off. The light wasn't right. It was too dim. Not in the way of a place that's going easy on the electricity, more like the light was old, like the bulbs were the wrong color. And the snow in the parking lot hadn't been plowed, not recently anyway. He was driving through maybe 8 or 9 inches of unbroken snow, which meant no vehicles had moved through that lot in hours. But the trucks parked along the fence line, he counted 4 of them, looked like they'd been there a while. He couldn't see any exhaust coming from their stacks, no engines running. He parked close to the building and climbed down. The cold hit him hard, 30 below with the wind chill easy. He jogged to the front door. It was unlocked. Inside was a diner counter setup, a few booths, overhead fluorescent lights that flickered and buzzed. There was a coffee maker behind the counter with what looked like a full pot. He could see the liquid in it. Menus on the tables, a TV mounted in the corner showing static. But there was nobody there. No staff, no customers, no sound except the buzzing lights and the wind outside. Hank stood at the door for a moment, looking around. He called out, "Hello? Anybody here?" His voice sounded strange in the empty room, like it wasn't traveling right. He walked to the counter, the coffee pot. He reached out and touched the side of it. It was stone cold. He looked down at the counter more carefully. There was a layer of dust on it, not a thick layer, but noticeable. The menus in the booths, when he leaned over and looked at one, had a faint yellowing to the laminate. The salt shaker on the nearest table had no salt in it. The ketchup bottle was empty and dried out. This place hadn't been open in a long, long time. Hank backed toward the door slowly. He didn't like being in there. The feeling in the room was heavy, he said, like the air itself was stale and wrong, like he was somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. He got back in his truck, locked the doors, and pulled out of that lot as fast as the snow would let him. He got back on the interstate and drove until he found a Flying J that was open and bright and full of people, and he sat in there for a long time before he could stop his heart from pounding. Later, when he told other drivers about it, someone suggested maybe it was just an old closed-down stop and he'd misread his GPS. That seemed reasonable, logical. Hank accepted that explanation for a while. But a few months later, he was passing through that same area on a clear summer day and decided to find the place. He took the same exit, drove the same county road north. There was nothing there. No building, no pump canopies, no gravel lot, just a flat field of grass and scrub brush, not even a foundation, not even a sign. He checked old satellite images online when he got home. The field had been empty for at least as far back as the imagery went. He has no explanation. He said the coffee pot was real, the counter was real, the dust under his fingertips was real. He was inside something that night. He just doesn't know what. Story 3, Channel 19. Curtis had been team driving with his brother-in-law Ray for about 3 years when this happened. They ran a double driver setup, one sleeping in the bunk while the other drove, which meant they could cover serious ground without stopping. Long stretches through the night, through the Midwest Corn Belt, through whatever weather rolled through. This was a January run, hauling auto parts from Detroit out to Denver. They were somewhere in the middle of Nebraska, which, if you've driven it, you know is exactly as remote and empty as it sounds, when the blizzard caught them. They'd been monitoring the weather all day and knew it was coming, but it moved faster than expected. By 11 that night, they were in near whiteout conditions, wind gusts shaking the cab, maybe 100 feet of visibility. Ray was driving. Curtis was in the passenger seat, technically off duty, but too keyed up to sleep. He had the CB on, running on Channel 19 the way most long-haul guys do, just keeping an ear on road conditions. It had been mostly quiet for the last hour or so. The weather had cleared most of the traffic off the road. Then, just past midnight, a voice came on the CB. At first, Curtis thought it was static forming itself into something voice-like. That happens sometimes, especially in bad weather. But then he heard it clearly. It was a man's voice. Calm. Almost too calm for someone who was apparently in trouble. "Eastbound on 92, I've got a truck that went off the road about a mile west of..." and then a number, a mile marker that Curtis couldn't quite catch. "Driver's still in the cab, needs help. Anybody copy?" Curtis grabbed his mic. "Copy that. Can you give us the mile marker again?" A pause. Static. Then the voice again. Same tone. Almost like a recording. "Eastbound on 92, I've got a truck that went off the road about a mile west of..." Same message. Exact same message. Word for word. Curtis looked at Ray. Ray had heard it too. He was frowning at the CB unit. "That sounded like it looped," Ray said. Curtis keyed up again. "Driver on 92, can you hear me? What's your current location? Are you stopped or moving?" Silence for a moment. Then, different this time, not the looping message, a direct response. "I'm stopped. I've been stopped for a while." Curtis said the voice had changed somehow, still calm, but with something underneath the calm that he didn't like, something that didn't sound right for a guy who'd just witnessed an accident and was calling for help. "How far back are you? We're westbound. We can turn around at the next exit." Another pause. Then, "You don't need to turn around. Just keep going." Ray and Curtis looked at each other again. "Sir, if there's an injured driver, we need to call it in, and we may need to stop." "Keep going." Harder this time, less calm. "Just keep going." And then the channel went dead. Curtis immediately called 911 and reported the message: possible truck accident, Highway 92, somewhere in a roughly 10-mile stretch. The dispatcher said they'd look into it and took his information. He and Ray drove in silence for a few minutes. The storm was still hammering the cab. Neither of them said what they were thinking, which was that the whole exchange had felt deeply, profoundly wrong. Not just the repeated message, not just the way the voice told them to keep going. The whole thing had the texture of something bad. About 6 miles further down the road, Ray said quietly, "Look." Off the right shoulder, about 50 yards into a field, was a semi-truck on its side, nose down into a ditch, rear trailer crumpled. No lights, no movement, like it had been there a while. The snow had already begun to accumulate on the undercarriage. Ray pulled over. They both grabbed their flashlights and ran out into the storm. The wind was screaming. The snow was ankle-deep in the field. They got to the cab of the downed truck. Empty. No driver, no blood, no sign of injury. The door was hanging open, banging in the wind. The cab had been empty long enough for snow to blow in and settle on the seat. Curtis climbed up and checked the logbook still sitting on the dash. The last entry was dated 3 days prior. 3 days. They called it in again with the exact location. Highway Patrol arrived about 40 minutes later. They searched the area in expanding circles in the snow. No driver was ever found. The responding officer told Curtis as he was getting ready to leave that the truck had been reported missing the previous week by a freight company out of Omaha. They'd assumed the driver had abandoned the load. It happens sometimes. But Curtis kept coming back to the voice on the CB. Because whoever, whatever, had been on that radio, they'd known exactly where that truck was. They'd called it in accurately. Mile marker, location, all of it. And then they'd told him not to stop. To this day, he doesn't know if they made the right call by stopping. He thinks they did. But sometimes, when he's out on a dark road in bad weather and the CB crackles to life, he waits a beat before answering, just to make sure it isn't that voice again. Story 4. White Line Fever. Lonnie had been driving for 22 years when this happened. He was one of those drivers who'd seen everything. Jackknife trucks, ice storms, black ice on mountain grades, you name it. He had the kind of calm that comes from 2 decades of handling bad situations. It took a lot to shake Lonnie. This story shook Lonnie. He was on a solo run through northern Minnesota in early February. He'd been out on the road for about 9 hours, heading toward Duluth with a load of industrial equipment. The storm had been building since about 4 in the afternoon, and by 8 o'clock, it was serious. Heavy snow, dropping temperatures, and the particular kind of wind that comes off the Canadian border in Minnesota that feels like it has a grudge. Lonnie was experienced enough to know his limits. When the visibility dropped below what he was comfortable with, he started looking for a place to park. The problem was, on this particular stretch of Highway 53, the options were limited. There were no major truck stops for about 30 miles in either direction. There were some wide shoulders, but with the wind and the snowdrift patterns, he was worried about getting stuck. He decided to push forward to a small town, or Minnesota, where he knew there was a gas station with a big lot the truck drivers used informally in bad weather. He'd stopped there before, knew the owner, sort of. It was maybe 18 miles ahead. The first 10 miles were bad, but manageable. He was down to about 20 miles per hour, watching his lane markings, keeping the white line on the right side of his cab and his peripheral vision as a guide. That's a technique a lot of experienced drivers use in near whiteout conditions. You can't always see far enough ahead to navigate by landmarks, so you track the line right at your side. Around mile 11, he started to notice something. The white line was behaving strangely. Now, Lonnie knew that wind and drifting snow can obscure lane markings, make them look broken or irregular. He'd seen that 100 times. But this was different. The line seemed to be And he struggled to describe this. Moving. Not drifting, not being obscured. Moving. Like it was shifting slightly, pulling toward the left, drawing him incrementally off course. He told himself he was just tired. He told himself it was the optical illusion that comes from staring at a single reference point for too long in bad weather, something that can genuinely mess with your depth perception and spatial awareness. He looked up, looked at the tree line on either side of the road, recalibrated. Then he looked back down at the line. It had moved again. He was drifting left. He corrected, brought himself back, checked his mirrors, checked his instruments. Everything looked normal. He pushed on. 5 miles from Orr, it happened again, but worse this time. He'd been tracking the line for maybe 2 minutes, and when he looked up, he realized he was almost completely in the oncoming lane, in a loaded semi, in a blizzard, at night, on a 2-lane highway. He yanked the wheel right, felt the trailer sway dangerously, corrected hard. His heart was slamming, his whole body flooded with adrenaline. He brought the truck to a stop on the shoulder, sat there breathing. He looked out his driver's side window. He drifted maybe 4 feet over the center line. If there had been any oncoming traffic, any at all, he'd have been in a head-on collision at highway speed. He sat there for 10 minutes, breathing, trying to understand what had happened. He wasn't that tired. He'd run longer without adequate sleep and kept it together. The lane markings were visible. He'd been doing everything right. When he finally pulled into Orr and parked at the gas station, the owner came out and offered him coffee. Lonnie told him what happened, described the way the line seemed to pull him left. The owner's expression did something complicated. "You're not the first one to say that, about that stretch." Lonnie asked what he meant. The owner told him that over the years, going back decades, there had been a number of accidents on that specific section of highway, not just weather-related slides or rollovers, head-on collisions, drivers crossing over, in conditions that didn't fully explain it, in some cases in relatively decent weather. One local theory, the owner said, was that there was something geological about that area, magnetic interference, some people said. Others said it was just a badly designed road curve that disoriented drivers. Lonnie asked if anyone had ever reported the line seeming to move. The owner looked at him for a long moment. "Yeah, one driver did, about 12 years ago." The man said it slowly. "Guy stopped in here white as a sheet, said the line walked him off the road." "What happened to him?" Lonnie asked. "He went back out, called it in safe a few hours later." "And the people who had accidents on that stretch?" The owner didn't answer right away. He poured more coffee into Lonnie's cup even though it was still mostly full. "Some of them," he said quietly, "didn't call in at all."
Story 5. The Other Driver. Greg had only been driving commercially for about 2.5 years when this happened, so he was still pretty green by trucker standards, but he knew enough to take a blizzard seriously. What he didn't know was that some things on the road are more dangerous than the weather. He was on a solo overnight haul through Iowa, Des Moines to Davenport, with a load of packaged goods. Standard run, nothing complicated, but a winter storm had blown in hard and fast, and by the time he was about 40 miles outside of Des Moines, he was in it deep. Snow coming down at an inch an hour, temps in the single digits, roads getting progressively worse. He said the scariest part of the drive wasn't the conditions, it was the other truck. He first noticed it about 20 miles into the storm, a semi running westbound, so toward him in the oncoming lanes, that seemed to be keeping exact pace with him, not passing, not falling behind, just matching his speed precisely. He noticed it because it caught his eye in a weird way. The truck's lights were slightly off. The headlights were a little too bright, too white, almost blue, compared to the warm yellow of most commercial trucks. He didn't think much of it at first. He passed it passed out of his mirrors, he moved on. Then, maybe 15 minutes later, he saw it again. Westbound lanes, same truck, he recognized the light color, keeping pace with him again. He slowed down slightly, experimentally. The other truck slowed too. He sped up. The other truck sped up. He told himself he was imagining the synchronicity, that he was just tired and pattern-seeking the way your brain does on a long night drive. He focused on the road ahead and tried not to look at the westbound lanes. For about 10 minutes he didn't look, just drove. Then his eye was drawn to his driver's side mirror. The other truck was there again, but now it was behind him, in the same direction, eastbound, following him. Greg said his stomach dropped. He thought maybe a truck had turned around at an exit and this was just coincidence, a different truck entirely. He kept driving. The headlights in his mirror stayed exactly the same distance back, not closing, not falling off, exactly the same distance. He tried calling on the CB, asked if any eastbound drivers were behind him on I-80, gave his location, no response. He tried speeding up again, not recklessly given the conditions, but enough to create a gap. When he checked his mirror a minute later, the truck was the same distance back. Then he did something he still isn't sure was smart. He slowed down drastically, from 50 to about 15 miles per hour, slow enough that anyone behind him would have to either pass him or nearly stop themselves. The headlights in his mirror slowed too, same distance, always the same distance. Greg pulled off at the next exit, just drove off the ramp, pulled into a dark fast food parking lot, and stopped. He sat there watching the interstate. The truck passed the exit without slowing, those pale blue headlights rolling past in the dark and the snow. He watched it until he couldn't see it anymore. He gave it 10 minutes, got back on the highway, and made the rest of the drive without incident. He posted about it online afterward, partly just to get it out of his head, and the responses he got were interesting. A handful of other truckers in the comments said they'd experienced something similar on various interstate stretches, a vehicle keeping impossible pace with them, matching their every speed change, then disappearing. One guy, an older driver with 30-plus years, just wrote, "Don't engage with it, don't slow down for it, don't pull over for it, just drive." Greg asked the guy what he meant, what it was. The guy never responded.
Story 6. Knock. Terry had been driving for about 8 years, mostly Midwest and Plains states, and this was his strangest and most disturbing experience in all that time. He posted it to Reddit almost 2 years after it happened because, he said, he needed enough distance from it to write it down without his hand shaking. It was a February night in North Dakota, outside of Minot. He'd made his delivery and was parked at a rest stop about 12 miles outside of town, waiting out the worst of a storm before finishing his run. The wind was hitting 60 miles per hour with gusts. The temperature was around -15. It was, by any reasonable measure, a night where you stayed inside whatever shelter you had and didn't move. Terry had his engine running for heat, his bunk curtains drawn, and was trying to get a few hours of sleep before the weather broke. He'd been dozing for maybe 2 hours when he heard it. A knock on the side of his cab. Not on the window, on the metal, lower down, near the step. 3 slow knocks. His first thought was another driver, maybe someone in trouble needing help. He pulled back his bunk curtain and looked out the side window. He couldn't see anything. The storm was that bad, just swirling white and darkness. He called out, "Can I help you? Anybody there?" Nothing. He figured it was just debris hitting the cab. Wind can do strange things, pick up branches or pieces of metal from the road and slam them into vehicles. He settled back down. 20 minutes later, knock, knock, knock. Same rhythm, same location on the cab. He sat up fully this time. He put on his boots, grabbed his flashlight, and opened the cab door. The wind nearly tore it out of his hand. He shone the flashlight around. Nobody. He looked at the ground around the truck, deep snow, undisturbed except for the tire tracks from when he'd pulled in. No footprints. He got back in, locked the door. His heart was beating faster than he wanted to admit. He lay in the bunk with his eyes open. Another 20 minutes passed. Knock, knock, knock. And this time it was different, not just on the one spot. This time it traveled. 3 knocks on the passenger side, then a pause, then 3 knocks on the driver's side, then a pause, then 3 knocks from underneath,
from below the chassis. Whatever it was had moved around his truck while he lay there listening. Terry sat absolutely still. Then he heard something else, not a knock, a voice, coming from outside, muffled by the storm, but unmistakably a voice. He couldn't make out words, just the cadence of speech. It sounded like someone talking quietly, conversationally, the way you'd talk to someone standing right next to you. But there was no one out there. He knew there was no one out there. Nobody could survive standing outside in those conditions. He pulled out his phone and called 911. He told them what was happening. Stranded trucker at the Minot rest stop, someone knocking on his truck. The dispatcher said they'd send a patrol car. The knocking stopped while he was on the phone. No more voice. The patrol car arrived about 40 minutes later. The officer walked the perimeter of the truck with a spotlight. He checked the other vehicles in the rest stop lot. There were 2 other trucks parked far on the other side, both dark, both clearly with sleeping drivers inside. The officer came back to Terry's window and told him he'd found nothing, no one outside. He'd knocked on the other trucks and gotten groggy responses from the drivers inside. Neither of them had gotten out of their cabs all night. Terry asked the officer if this kind of call happened often, stranded truckers reporting things. The officer thought about it for a second. Then he said, "Not often, but you're not the first person to call from this specific rest stop." Terry asked what the other calls had been about. The officer looked at him for a moment, then said he probably shouldn't say, but Terry pressed him. "Knocking," the officer finally said. "Always knocking." He wouldn't say anything else. He just told Terry to keep his doors locked and try to get some sleep, and drove away.
This last story comes from a driver named Opie, short for something he didn't share. He said he just went by Opie, who'd been running Midwest routes for about 14 years. He submitted this as part of a longer post about strange things he'd seen on the road, but said this particular incident was the one he thought about most. It was an overnight haul through Illinois and Indiana in January, about 3 years before he posted. He was carrying a load of manufacturing supplies from Chicago down to Indianapolis. Normally a straightforward run, Interstate 65 south, a few hours, done. But the weather that night was bad. Ice storm, specifically, which is often worse than a pure snowstorm because the road surface becomes treacherous in ways that even experienced drivers struggle with. Ice is silent, and it doesn't warn you. Snow at least gives you texture to push against. Ice just lets you slide. Opie was taking it slow, very slow. He was in the right lane, flashes on, doing about 22 miles per hour in a 55 zone. He was fine with that. He'd rather take 6 hours than end up in a ditch or jackknifed across the highway. He was somewhere in the middle of Indiana, around the Remington area, when he got a call on his cell phone. That in itself wasn't unusual. He had a hands-free setup and took calls fairly regularly. What was unusual was the caller. It was another truck driver, a man named Boyd. Opie and Boyd had crossed paths a few times over the years. Not friends exactly, more like professional acquaintances. They'd eaten at the same truck stop diners, traded road condition information on the CB. Opie had Boyd's number in his phone from some logistical coordination they'd done on a shared route a couple years back. "Hey Boyd," Opie said, "what's up?" "Where are you?" Boyd said. His voice was tight, strained. Opie gave him a rough location, south of Remington, Indiana, I-65 southbound. "I'm behind you, about 30 miles back." Opie said that was fine. The roads were rough but manageable. He passed on some information about conditions a few miles back that Boyd would be hitting. "Listen," Boyd said, "I need you to do something for me." Opie said, "Sure, what do you need?" "Don't stop tonight. Whatever you see, whatever happens, just don't stop." Opie said the tone of Boyd's voice is what got him. Not panicked exactly, but extremely serious, like he was passing on information he knew and believed completely. "Boyd, what's going on?" Opie asked. A pause. Then, I've been following something on the road tonight. Something I can't explain, and I think it's ahead of me, which means it's ahead of you, too. Opie asked him to be more specific. Boyd described a figure, standing or moving along the interstate shoulder. He'd first seen it about 60 miles back. He slowed down, thought maybe it was a stranded motorist, but it was moving too strangely. He said the movement didn't look right, like the joints bent the wrong way, like the proportions were off. I slowed down when I first saw it, and then it looked at me, Boyd said. Opie waited. I don't want to tell you what that was like. I really don't. Just don't stop. Drive straight through. Don't look at the shoulder. Opie said he drove the next 2 hours with his eyes strictly on the road ahead, not on the shoulders, not in his mirrors more than necessary. He made it to Indianapolis, delivered his load, and texted Boyd to let him know he'd arrived fine. Boyd texted back a few hours later. 2 words. Me too. Opie tried to call him the next day to get the full story. Boyd didn't answer. He texted again. Boyd replied that he was fine, but that he didn't want to talk about what he'd seen on the shoulder that night in any more detail than he already had. He said there was one more thing, though, one thing he hadn't mentioned on the call. When he'd slowed down the first time, the figure had turned to look at him, and it had waved. Not desperately, not frantically, the way someone stranded would wave for help. Just a slow, casual wave, like it recognized him, like it had been expecting him specifically. Boyd never drove that stretch of I-65 again, even in perfect weather. He rerouted his runs around it. He told Opie that some roads, once something has looked at you from them, stop being just roads. Opie said he didn't fully understand what Boyd meant until the following winter, when he was forced to take that same route again. He said as he passed the area where Boyd had first seen the figure, he felt a sudden, overwhelming certainty, not fear exactly, something quieter and worse than fear, that if he turned and looked at the right shoulder, he would see something standing there. He kept his eyes forward. He doesn't know if that was the right choice or not. He never looked. Those were 7 stories from truckers on Reddit, people who live on the road, people who know the difference between weather phenomena and something that genuinely doesn't fit any explanation they've been able to find. If you've got a story of your own, something that happened on a long haul, a night drive, something you saw out there in the dark, drop it in the comments. I read all of them, and if I use yours in a future video, I'll reach out. As always, thanks for watching. Stay safe out there, and maybe, just maybe, don't stop for things you can't explain.